thing we have to fear is
in war.
fear itself.
There is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we burn, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
You found your way to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thank you for joining us today. Be sure and visit our websites at wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com. A lot of information on both those websites. At WallBuilders Live, you can get a list of all of our stations. If you've been listening to our podcast or online for a while and you've never listened to us on one of the stations, or maybe you're not familiar with the station that we're on in your area, a complete list is available there at wallbuilderslive.com, about 200 stations around the country where you can pick up WallBuilders Live. Also, you might want to have our program carried on a station in your area that's not yet carrying it. Take some of the links from our program and send it to that station and ask them to pick up WallBuilders Live. We would appreciate that. And you can send us emails about that station as well, and we'll contact them. Also at wallbuilders.com, a lot of great information there in terms of news sources and also great materials by David Barton over the years in terms of the history of our nation, the true history of our nation, and what our founders intended for our nation to become. All the principles of our nation are greatly under attack, and one of those areas is certainly our rights of conscience and our parental rights. Mat Staver from Liberty Counsel, certainly one of the foremost experts on the Constitution in our country, argues before the Supreme Court quite often, and represents some of the folks around the nation that have been most under attack by our government. You might recall the case of Justina, the young gal that was literally kidnapped by government, and her parents not even allowed to see her most of the time. It was an awful case last year. We covered it several times here on the program, and Mat Staver represented the family in that case. Well, at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference this year, Mat Staver came in from Liberty Counsel and talked about that case and other rights of conscience or rights of conscience cases, and covered those for our legislators to talk about the kind of legislation that, if passed in the individual states, could help prevent these kind of travesties from happening again. So in sharing that with the legislators, it's spurring them to file legislation back in their individual states this year. And we wanted to share that talk with you, here, our WallBuilders listeners. We wanted you to know so that you could then support that legislation in your individual states and be informed of what was going on with those particular efforts. So Mat Staver, speaking at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference, is going to be our special program today, tomorrow, and the next day. So it's a three-part series. When it's all said and done, you can take all three portions of that program and email it out to your friends and family and share this information with them as well. So we're going to go to the Pro-Family Legislators Conference in Dallas. This is a group of state legislators from across the nation coming together once a year to exchange ideas, sharpen each other's countenance, and work hard to preserve freedom for future generations. Here's Mat Staver at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference.
Thanks, Rick. It's always good to be with you and see the great work you're doing. And David Barton is one of my national heroes. I think he's a national treasure, frankly, as a walking encyclopedia of American history. I don't think anybody else knows American history in our founding documents as well as David Barton. So I am very pleased to be able to be here. I'm Mat Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. My wife, Anita, is my very best friend. We've been married for 30 years this year, and she gives you her greetings. She's president of Liberty Counsel. What I wanted to talk about is religious liberty and parental rights, and focus on these two areas. Let me begin, first of all, by focusing on one area of parental rights in a case that Liberty Counsel had in Boston, Massachusetts. How many of you heard of the Justina Pelletier case? Raise your hand. It was a case that we thought was unbelievable. We had to investigate it in different ways to determine whether or not the facts as we were presented were actually what was actually taking place. But we got a call earlier this year when this man, the father, Lou Pelletier, went on Glenn Beck and Fox News. And he shared a story about his then 13-year-old daughter, Justina Pelletier, who in January of 2013 was a figure skater. She was engaged in figure skating competition. There was actually photographs of her as a figure skater, but she had a condition that she was being treated for at Tufts Medical Center, and she was being treated by the chief of metabolics, who was the head of that particular area, Dr. Mark Corson. And she also was treated by another gastroenterologist at that same medical facility. So in early February, she gets a gastrointestinal issue. She wasn't able to eat, kind of have a flu-like symptom. And Dr. Corson recommended that she be taken by her family. They live in Connecticut, go over into Boston and go to Boston's Children's Hospital. Why? Because her treating gastroenterologist just moved from Tufts across town to Boston Children's Hospital, and they wanted to have her seen by that same individual that had been seeing her before at Tufts. So the family, at the direction of her treating physician, transported her to Tufts, to Boston Children's Hospital. And Boston Children's Hospital, instead of allowing her to see the gastroenterologist that was with her for some time, ultimately, she was instead seen by an individual who was 7 months out of medical school from the Netherlands, and he brought in another individual who was a psychologist. This individual didn't believe in the working diagnosis of Justina, did not call the treating physician just across town at Tufts, and would not call in the gastroenterologist specialist who was the head of pediatrics at Tufts and now was at Boston Children's Hospital. Instead brought in a psychologist. And the psychologist was doing research that was funded by the National Institutes of Health. And this research was looking at gastrointestinal distress and mental conditions, whether they are caused by physical or whether it's all in your mind. And her position was that 1 out of every 2, or 50% of all children under age 18, if they present with a physical complaint, they actually have no physical complaints at all. It's all in their head. So doctors, you need to then transfer the treatment of all of these individuals from physical to psychological. They need to have psychological intervention. So she then said, it's all in your head. We're going to have a new treatment plan. They presented the family with a 1-page form, and here's the new treatment plan they wanted them to sign. You would have no medicine. All the medicine would be withdrawn from you. No more medications that your treating physicians had been giving you, which, by the way, had been working fairly well because just a few weeks ago you were still doing competitive figure skating, but no more medication.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Our founding fathers, despite their common love for America, did not always agree with each other in politics. Such was the case between John and Samuel Adams. John was the leader of the Federalist Party, and Samuel was a leader of the Anti-Federalist Party. Consequently, political disagreements were not unusual between these two. On October the 4th, 1790, Sam wrote John and told him, "Let ministers and philosophers, statesmen and patriots unite their endeavors to renovate the age by educating their little boys and girls and leading them in the study and practice of the exalted virtues of the Christian system." 2 weeks later, John wrote back and told Samuel that on this issue they both agreed. While these two prominent founding fathers disagreed on much, they both agreed on the importance of educating the next generation in the principles of Christianity.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
No more medical treatment. It'll all be psychological treatment. And the last point was you cannot seek a second opinion from anyone else. Sign this form. This is the new direction for the medical treatment. And the family said, well, what about our gastroenterologist? We're not calling him in. We don't believe that it has anything to do with physical. It's all mental. And what about Dr. Corson? No, we're not calling him in either. This is the new treatment plan. And they said, well, thank you very much. We're going to check her out. We're going to go right back across town. We're going to take her to Tufts Medical Center, which is a teaching hospital of Tufts University. So these are very well-known facilities and institutions. They said, not so fast. They called in the Department of Children and Families, and they said that what is happening here is, quote, medical abuse. We believe that this child needs to be treated psychologically, not medically. The family wants to treat the child medically, and consequently we believe that it is medical abuse. And they ultimately prevented the family from taking Justina, who was 13 years of age, out of the hospital. In fact, they prevented the family from even going to the room and saying goodbye to their 13-year-old daughter. They escorted them out, and they said that you cannot come back here unless invited. To come back here without invitation, you would ultimately be considered a trespasser and subject to arrest. So they put her on this treatment of eliminating all medical. They discontinued all medications, and they began to treat her psychologically. Now you think, well, shouldn't the courts have intervened? Well, the courts are required in Massachusetts to have a hearing within 72 hours of the time that a child is taken from the home to determine whether or not there's good cause to maintain the child in the custody of the state. And if there's not, you return them back to the family. Well, the so-called 72-hour hearing took place 3 months later. And in that hearing, the judge never issued an opinion. The judge continued to just kick the can down the road. And finally, in November, December of 2013, as another hearing was coming up, the Boston Globe decided to do some investigative stories on Boston Children's Hospital on this case. They also heard that similar things had happened to other families like this, and they were asking questions. They asked questions of the Department of Children and Families. They then were asking questions of others. And so at one of these preliminary hearings in November, December of 2013, they just went to the judge and said, Judge, there's media that's making inquiries about this case. We want the parents to have a gag order. So the judge just called the counsel to the side of the bench and said, there's a gag order in here. You can no longer talk to any media locally in Boston or in your hometown in Connecticut. And no written order, no notice, no warning, no opportunity to argue it. A gag order is issued. So he wasn't able to speak to the Boston Globe and wasn't able to communicate to media. The Boston Globe did release a story. They not only profiled Justina Pelletier, but they found that 5 other families that they were able to uncover had the same exact thing happen, where they came to the hospital and they were being treated outside of Boston Children's for medical conditions. Boston Children's changed it to a psychological diagnosis. When the parents disagreed, they called into the Department of Children and Families, and those kids also were taken into the custody of the Department of Children and Families. Now, this is the same Department of Children and Families that had about 134 children that were lost in their possession. They have no idea to this day where they are. In fact, one of them was a 5-year-old boy that was taken out of the home and was lost during the height of the litigation that we were involved in 2014, and the media attention. They did find that 5-year-old boy, but they found his decomposed body, and he died. As a result of that, the head of DCF finally stepped down and resigned. But what happened was, February of 2014 rolls around. Justina now is progressing, or I should say digressing, from a competitive figure skater in January of 2013 to now being completely immobilized, and she's in a wheelchair. She is so weak now from not having medical intervention that she needed, not having the nutrients and supplements that were helping her. She's now confined to a wheelchair and she cannot move. In fact, we found the guardian ad litem's report the very first time that the guardian ad litem temporarily was on the case in 2013, and gave an investigation how sloppy the records were in this facility at Boston Children's Hospital, and also how the people at Boston Children's were telling Justina, it's all in your head. Everyone agrees there's nothing physically wrong with you. If you just think you're going to be better, you'll be better. So cheer up. Why are you so down? And then she would say, have you talked to my doctor, Dr. Corson? Well, he agrees with us. Well, it wasn't true. Dr. Corson had tried to come and visit her at Boston Children's Hospital, and Boston Children's Hospital refused. Now, refused a physician who is a treating physician, who's the chief of metabolics at a teaching hospital in the same city, Tufts Medical Center, just across town. So this is unbelievable of what was happening. When it looked like she was going down very close to death's door, that's when Lou Pelletier went on Fox News in Glenn Beck, and that's when it hit the media. Then we found out about it, and we contacted the family. When we heard the story, we thought something else must be going on. This can't be happening in America. There's got to be something else going on with the family. Let's make sure before we jump into this that we have all of our facts straight, because we don't want to get egg on our face, come out and litigate, have a media splash, and then turn out that this family is a bad family.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Today, numerous court decisions demonstrate that there's often a conflict between the courts, the law, and religion. Has this conflict always existed? Not according to James Wilson. James Wilson was a signer of both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. He was a law professor as well as an original justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. James Wilson saw no conflict between religion and the law. In fact, just the contrary. He declared, "Human law must rest its authority ultimately upon the authority of that law which is divine." Far from being rivals or enemies, religion and law are twin sisters, friends, and mutual assistants. Indeed, these two sciences run into each other. In the views of Founding Father James Wilson, religion and good civil law were inseparable.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Well, what we found out was exactly the truth, that Boston Children's Hospital had a pattern of doing this. In fact, some of the people used a joking term called parentectomy, that they wanted to excise or cut out the parents from the child because the bureaucrats know better how to treat that child, and if you remove the parents who are the problem. Now, there is this thing called Munchausen's by proxy. Munchausen's by proxy is where some parent would think that the child needs medical treatment and give them medical treatment, and ultimately, instead of helping them, it hurts them. But if you remove the parent from that situation, what would happen? They no longer get unnecessary invasive medical intervention. The child should do what? Not digress. They should increase in their health. In fact, exactly the opposite happened. And they never alleged that it was Munchausen's by proxy. When the parents were removed and the medical treatment was removed, she went down, down, and down. In fact, not only did she go down medically, but for 16 months, when she finally was released, 16 months later in June of this year, she had no education at all for 16 months. So she has effectively gone back 2 years in her education. She had no medical treatment until we got on the case toward the very end. And she had no access to religious services. The family's Roman Catholic. She was never allowed a priest to come in and give communion. No celebration for Easter. No celebration for Christmas. No Mass. No clergy of any kind was ever allowed to come in and visit her. When the family did go public with Fox News in Glenn Beck, the DCF filed a motion with the judge wanting to hold the father in contempt, and that's when we showed up on that Monday hearing and opposed it. We went through several months of litigation, and DCF would do all kinds of things. We saw even worse situations with DCF because the family was allowed only 1 hour of in-person visitation a week on Friday under supervision, and one 15-minute telephone conversation on Tuesday. During the Tuesday telephone conversation, the person in the room would count down. You have 10 minutes left, 5 minutes remaining, 1 minute remaining. They might be in the middle of a sentence. Could have been an intimate conversation between mom and dad or her 3 other sisters or a 92-year-old grandmother. Doesn't matter, but the phone went click. 15 minutes, you're done. Doesn't matter what you're saying, what you're trying to talk about. And, by the way, the family, under this requirement, was not allowed to ask her about medical conditions. In fact, one of the times in 2014, after we got on the case, we found out that she was rushed to the hospital by DCF. When the family was able to talk to her on Tuesday following that weekend emergency treatment, or see her personally on Friday, they were not able to ask her, Justina, why were you in the hospital over the weekend? How are you feeling? What's happening why are those red marks appearing on your abdomen? They were not allowed to ask her because they would be shut down either by the person that was on the other end of the phone, or alternatively, they would be escorted out of the room with the people who were there in the supervised visitation. And on the visitation, since they only had 1 hour a week, they would stress the family. They had to drive several hours from Connecticut to Boston and go back, so they literally, for 16 months, they were not able to work. He had to give up his working on Friday because he had to spend that whole day just going to visit and come back home to see his daughter. And they were waiting there. The visit was going to be, I think, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They're waiting for Justina to come out. Justina doesn't come out. 30 minutes later, no Justina. They're asking, where's Justina? Finally, they get us on the phone. We're trying to find who's in charge. We're getting voicemail. And then they come out and say, we're not going to allow visitation today. Well, why is that? Because there's a media truck out in the parking lot. Well, they didn't invite the media. The media's not coming into the visitation. They're out in the parking lot. They want to interview the family after they come out. So they wanted to punish them because a media truck was out there. 3 hours later, we were finally able to get the visitation back on track. So that's the case. We ultimately were able to get Justina released. She was not able to spend her 16th birthday with her family at home, but she did have a 16th birthday celebration in June after she did return. And she's back home, but she still needs a lot of intervention because, again, she went for 16 months, longer than the Iranian hostages of 444 days, with virtually no medical treatment, no education, and virtually no relationship with her family, and no relationship or communication with anybody at school. They did not do a home visit. They did not call the school. They did not consult the treating physicians. They ended up just intervening.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
We found that this is a pervasive problem, not just at Boston Children's Hospital, but also at other hospitals around the country as well. We got calls from Alaska all the way from that coast in California to the East Coast. And so as a result of that, we worked out a proposed piece of legislation, and we did some of this legislation in conjunction with Mike Ferris, who was helping us out. We were collaborating. They had some legislation, and I'll pull it up here on the screen in just a moment. This is the legislation. This is a draft piece of legislation. It's not in your packet, but David will ultimately get it sent to you, so you'll get this legislation. There's also a precursor legislation that you'll see that we're not showing on the screen because it's federal. That precursor legislation has been introduced in Congress. It's called Justina's Law, and it would prohibit federal funds from going to any researcher or institution whenever there's a conflict of interest like this. Because here's what you have happening in Boston Children's. A researcher getting federal funds to research the relationship between gastrointestinal distress and mental conditions. So she's getting federal dollars to research that. Now she gets someone who presents with gastrointestinal distress. She thinks 1 out of every 2, it's all in your head. So 1 out of every 2, it's going to be mental. So she classifies this person as mental. She either has a voluntary or an involuntary additional candidate for research. If the family complies, she'll add her to her 1 year of research. If the family doesn't comply, she says it's medical abuse, calls in DCF. They rubber stamp it, and the courts are just simply incompetent in that state because they don't follow the statutory requirement of the 72-hour hearing and the detailed findings of fact. And consequently, she keeps her in custody for a year. Ironically, it was 16 months after she was incarcerated that she ultimately was released. There's no question in my mind that she became a part of this researcher's research that was funded by the federal government.
Well, folks, we're out of time for today, so we're going to have to pick up right where we left off there with Mat Staver at the Pro-Family Legislators Conference. We'll do that tomorrow. Encourage you to visit our website today at wallbuilderslive.com. And also visit wallbuilders.com and click on that link for the Pro-Family Legislators Conference and send that link to your state legislators. Let them know it's an opportunity for them to learn from great speakers, to interact with other legislators around the country that share their values, and to get great ideas that they can then bring in your state legislature. We'll catch you tomorrow. We'll pick up with Mat Staver from right where we left off today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided forever.